Well, a new government report accuses the U.S. government, meaning the CDC, the FDA, and Health and Human Services, of delaying or suppressing warnings about myokarditis or other adverse events following the mRNA COVID vaccine, especially in young people. Now, we're going to show you how, if they had warned people, they could have saved lives and prevented cardiac events. This is now irrefutable, and you should be mad as snakes about it. So let's dive in and see what there is to see. This comes from Senator Ron Johnson's Subcommittee on Investigations. It's called Failure to Warn: How Federal Agencies Downplayed the Risk of Myokarditis and Other Adverse Events Following COVID-19 Vaccinations. And it is damning. We should point out we only know about this because President Trump took office, because Senator Johnson had subpoenaed these emails repeatedly during the Biden administration and was put off. When President Trump took office in January of 2025, he was handing this very smoking gun, and he took it from there. He knew all of this was there. It was just a matter of seeing the emails. Now, here's why this is terrible. The U.S. government and the Israeli government both knew that the vaccination was associated with myokarditis in young people, particularly boys. And instead of warning the public or instigating a protocol to screen for it, they fooled around on emails and then did nothing that they could have stopped it. Now, who do you think, Clayton, if you say, who's the most active population of humans? When in life, who is the most active? Like in sports and things like that?
Probably like 14, 15, 16-year-old boys.
Yeah. Adolescent and young men, right?
Yeah.
This is the population that was having myokarditis, and they could have screened them and told them don't exercise for a while. But they let this active population out there in the world at risk. They did not notify the American public. In fact, they only notified Pfizer and Moderna. They gave them a heads up. And even worse, like they could have said, you could get hurt here. Let's screen for this. But instead, they just kind of faffed about on email. Now, you can help people with myokarditis. This is actively something you could do about it. We learned this from this 2023 study out of a university in Switzerland. It showed that people who were given the vaccine were then screened for myokarditis following the vaccination. You do this by searching for what's called a troponin in the blood. When they did find it, they warned those people. And they said, hey, you need to rest for the next couple of days because you have heart inflammation. If you don't, you can have a cardiac event. So let's say for the next week, you don't do exercise. When they did that, everyone was fine. Nobody had a cardiac event. Nobody collapsed. Listen to Dr. John Campbell explain this. This was from when the study was published in 2023.
So what they did, if people had raised troponins at 3 days after the booster, they said, look, you've got raised troponins after 3 days. Therefore, let's get a repeat blood test. Therefore, let's get a 12-lead ECG or other cardiological investigations as the cardiologists deem fit. Take rest. Do not exercise, because if you've got myokarditis and you just rest for a few days, good chance it'll just go away, get better. If you go running or training, there's a good chance. Not a good chance, but there's a chance you can go into a ventricular fibrillation, into a full cardiac arrest. So the fact that these people were warned is so important. Probably not happening where you are, certainly not happening where I am.
Okay, so in 2023, these scientists discovered this in Switzerland. Unfortunately, our own government knew that in 2021 and decided not to warn these people. So these people had a risk of myokarditis. They didn't screen for it, and they did not warn them. And then we saw evidence after evidence of young men collapsing on sports field. Now, the CDC, in fact, had drafted language in public warning the public about this. And here is the CDC official, Dr. Dimitri Descalaskis, saying, let's remove this. I don't think we need it. And in fact, he was the director at the time of the Division of HIV and AIDS Prevention. Why is he ringing in? Who the hell knows? And he's saying, no, I think that we should walk back this sentence, which we now know could have prevented attacks. The sentence was, and I'm sorry, it's a kind of a crap screenshot, but it's from the report saying, due to concerns for sudden cardiac events while the heart recovers, consider restricting patients with myocarditis from rigorous activity like competitive sports for at least 3 months until cleared by a healthcare professional. How many of these people could have had this warning and they decided it was unnecessary? And then we saw when this protocol was instigated in Switzerland, it saved it saved people's lives. In fact, here's another draft of the Health Alert Network that, the CDC thought they should send out, warning to get troponin tests. They never published it. Instead, they talked themselves out of it with emails like this, like, oh, we're here deciding about the pros and cons of whether we should issue this. And the cons are that we don't want to appear alarmist.
I mean, okay, so wait a minute. That to me could be the most damning part of all of this, which is, okay, you've already notified Pfizer and Moderna of the risks of this.
Yes.
We know this, right?
Yes.
So you've notified them about it. So then these people are presumably taking the shot. I mean, that's bad enough that you knew about it and you're still allowing them to take it. But then you also know that there's post-vaccine treatment, which can help if there is myocarditis. And you're also choosing then not to tell parents about this treatment option that can help them if they do get myocarditis?
They chose not to. They could have said, let's screen for troponins if you're in this at-risk population, which is mostly young people, young men. If we see the troponins, you don't exercise for a while. Instead, they did not warn them. They vaccinated young people. They mandated it in most colleges and then let college athletes collapse on the field. We saw that happening. We know it happened. They chose not to warn about it. They only warned Pfizer and Moderna and said, hey, are we picking this up in our VAERS system, which is the adverse events system? Should we follow this? Why don't you let us know when you see this? Because again, doctors are not required to report adverse events. Neither are hospitals. Only the vaccine makers themselves are required. And how do they even know? Because they don't administer the vaccines. What were you going to say, David?
Well, I was going to say, and we all know that they tried to hide their own documentation of any adverse reactions for 75 years. But fortunately, that judge opened it up in Texas. But they didn't want us to know any of the adverse reactions.
Right. But this is showing us they knew that they could actually do something about it and prevent. So if you know somebody.
That's criminal negligence.
Yes, I would say it is. I think that.
Right, because they keep calling it a misstep. Oh, it was a misstep. No, it's not. It's not a misstep. It's criminal negligence.
I mean,
right. Go ahead, Philip.
I mean, it sounds like they're in a building. They see a fire. They don't want to pull the fire alarm because they don't want to appear alarmist. So what they do is they just notify the building owner, "Hey, there's a fire in your building. If you want to do something about it." And then
you probably don't want to alarm the people in the building. Yeah, you probably don't even want to tell the people in the building.
Yeah, you don't tell people in the building.
If you pull the fire alarm, you're an alarmist.
And then all those people end up dying in the building, and that's just a misstep.
Right.
You know, it's a misstep. We should have, I don't know.
I'm sure. How would you feel if you or someone you loved had an incidence of myocarditis, did collapse during athletic activity, and know that the U.S. government knew that this was a risk and decided not to warn you about it? When all they had to do was tell you, this might be a risk, so rest. Screen your troponins and rest. How about that? You could have taken a few weeks off and not had a heart attack. How would you feel knowing that the government decided not to warn?
Well, not only that, but they gaslit people into thinking that they were stupid for thinking this was going on. That this was a conspiracy theory. This wasn't really happening. Yeah.
That's the third level, right? That's the third level because to me, and also they even took it to a fourth level. So, right, number one, they collaborated with Pfizer and Moderna. They told them they had this issue.
Yes, which they already knew in their clinical trials.
So this was not news to them. Knew and they knew. The government knew and they knew, the big pharma. Then they had the post-shot treatment options that they kept from the American people, didn't tell them that they could, watch your troponins and rest, right? So they kept that from them. Mm-hmm. The third level is exactly what Philip was talking about. They also then collaborated with the mainstream media to basically gaslight and call anyone like us a conspiracy theorist or block shows, ban shows, canceled doctors like Peter McCullough, Peter Corey, Robert Malone, and others who were noticing this myocarditis at the very beginning.
Right. And imagine had they issued this warning, then the media would have picked it up in this like, but it's still okay, kind of, well, we have to report on this, but it's still fine. The rest of us would have continued to research that, right? We didn't have that heads up in 2021. We only had it from the clinical trials and people who reported that who were called crazy. Right. And so, again, I don't need to tell you, you saw on social media, athlete after athlete collapsing, healthy people post-vaccination. So now we know this was real. They chose not to warn against it. So these doctors, especially the one that I showed you, who said, let's not send this, let's strike this from the warning, who then decided not to send the warning at all, they should lose their license, their medical license, permanent revocation, not just temporary, not just a punishment. They should be delicensed. And they should face charges for criminal behavior, malpractice, and ethical violations. Absolutely, that should happen. I don't think I've ever been this sure about anything until I've seen this. And so let me know what you think.
And also
Senator Ron Johnson, he can only do so much. He can only tell us, right? So now it's the Justice Department that needs to do that. Now this is the states. The state attorneys general needs to do something about this. It's not on us.
Oh, and Congress. Sorry to interrupt, David, but we need Congress to pass a law that enables us to actually sue these drug manufacturers over these vaccines. It's the only thing in America you can't sue for. Is the vaccines. Right.
We can't do anything other than just be outraged at this point until we have our lawmakers do something for us.
They're indemnified.
That's exactly what I was going to add, Clayton, to your list, like that they were immune from any punitive, like that you couldn't sue them over it. I was going to add that to your number 4 or 5 on your list.
Right. But
I think that's the only thing in America you can't sue for. Isn't that amazing? America's like the sue happiest country in the world. And actually, I went through a roller coaster of emotions about that over the years. Like, oh, it's sue happy. We shouldn't do that. We shouldn't do that. And then I've actually come around on that because that's one way you can actually compel these companies to actually do right by people.
No, I believe we litigate our values. I think that we need the court system for this. But in this case, sure, Pfizer and Moderna have immunity. Do the CDC? Does the FDA? They purposely did not warn young boys who were getting the vaccination of these risks or screen them after when they drafted it. So how about who's going to sue the CDC, right? I don't know. Is there a case there? I have no idea.
The doctors must too, because I didn't see a bunch of lawsuits at doctors either that were giving people wrong information. Like, did you see a bunch of lawsuits for doctors? I didn't.
I don't know about. Yeah, that's true. I haven't really heard about malpractice lawsuits for negligence. Like if you knew that this was the case, I don't know. I mean, you had people who get in deep trouble, like Dr. Peter McCullough, Peter Corey, Robert Malone, who were seeing myocarditis. They were telling people to avoid this. They were telling them, here's the protocols with ivermectin and other things. And they were canceled. They lost their jobs.
I'm telling you right now, if I had a high school athlete who collapsed because of myocarditis, and the government purposely did not warn my son, I would be. Someone in the chat says class action. I would be looking into this. Yeah. Absolutely, I would.